Hello and welcome to today's webinar on harnessing the power of DevOps, how to get the power of large enterprises. Contrary to popular belief, DevOps is not just for multinational enterprises. It doesn't have to be an 800-pound gorilla. On this webinar, you'll learn how companies of all sizes can leverage the power of DevOps and flex the same muscles as larger competitors. Thank you so much for joining us on this event. This event is produced in partnership with Taos. So thank you everyone out there. Before we get started, just a few things that you should know about today's webinar. First off, my name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as the moderator. We want this to be an educational event, as we always do here at Actual Tech Media, and so we encourage your questions there in the questions box. In fact, I can draw your attention to it this way. We will be doing our best to answer questions electronically during the event, but we'll be queuing up the best questions for a dedicated Q&A session that will be running at the end of the webinar. So make sure that you stay tuned for that. We also have a link there in the handouts tab to the Taos DevOps Now solution that you'll learn about on the webinar today. So make sure that you check that out. We also have an Amazon $300 gift card that we'll be announcing at the end of our webinar today. The winner must be present on the live event. If you're watching this on demand, of course, the drawing has already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found there in the handouts tab. And then new for this year, we've been doing our best question prize as well. So we encourage your questions. And if you have something on your mind, DevOps is can be a confusing topic, I know, for many folks out there in IT. And we're here to help. So we encourage your questions, and the prize winner for our best question prize will be selected and contacted after the event. Winners must meet the Actual Tech Media prize policy as well. And now, before I introduce you to today's expert presenters, I've got 3 quick poll questions for you, and I'll share the results of these. Hopefully you find the results of these polls interesting as well. So the question on the screen there now is, are you in the cloud? In other words, are you running your applications in the cloud in some way? Do you have your data stored in the cloud? Are you leveraging what the cloud can do? If you haven't answered these questions before, you do it right there in the slides window. It's a simple yes or no. And I'll give you just a moment to do that, and then I'll share the results. All right, I see a lot of responses coming in. Thank you, everyone, for your participation in these. Let me go ahead and share the results. And 85% of companies on the event today say that they are leveraging the cloud in some way, shape, or form. So thank you for that information. Next question, where are you in your cloud journey? Is this something you're still considering, thinking about it? Are you prepping to do some sort of migration to the cloud? You partially in with one foot there in the cloud with maybe a particular application or a certain use case? For example, disaster recovery, something like that. Do you have a baked hybrid cloud or entirely in the cloud? All right, thank you everyone who responded to that poll as well. Let me go ahead and share the results of this one. All right, looks like 40% roughly are partially in some way. 25% say they have a baked hybrid cloud. 14% entirely in the cloud. 10% still learning about it, thinking about it. 8% preparing to do a migration. So thank you for that. And then final poll question before I introduce you to today's expert presenters. The question on the screen is, what current issues do you care about the most? So is it reducing bugs? Is it deploying products faster, upstream services, diminished service interruptions? I don't want to influence the results too much, but diminished service interruptions would be tops on my list. Availability, uptime, it's become a hot topic today, keeping things up and running 24/7. So let me go ahead and share the results before I influence your votes. And sure enough, diminished service interruptions, 43% was the number one answer, followed by an equal tie between reducing bugs and deploying products faster. So thank you for all those responses. We do appreciate that. We'll have another poll at the end of the event today. And of course, we appreciate your participation in the polls. And with that, I'm excited now to introduce you to today's expert presenters. They are Mr. Brandon Knitter, Principal Architect at Taos, and Mr. Tim Clark, Senior Principal Solutions Architect, also at Taos. Brandon and Tim, it's great to have you on the event today. I'm excited to hear what you all are doing around DevOps at Taos and how you can help companies of all sizes out there. With that, I'll hand it off to you, Tim. Take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. The DevOps and cloud discussions are synonymous when organizations are looking to build efficiencies, improve reliability, or better scale their business. Cloud is here to stay. Very few instances am I meeting with the CIO or CXO of any organization where the cloud or DevOps conversation is not part of the pre or post sales engagement. Over half the enterprises are building prolific software in some way or fashion. 500 million applications will be developed by 2023, and 90% of new apps will be cloud native by 2025. 19% of DevOps markets will grow by 19.1%. What we're basically trying to articulate here is that most everybody in the IT space is utilizing the DevOps culture and in some form or fashion is effectively integrating in one of the clouds or hyperscalers that we all know. Next slide. DevOps is a cultural shift. It doesn't depend on the size of the company. It doesn't depend on the skill of the team or the size of the application. The ability for product development teams to collaborate with their operations colleagues is key to the success. What we try to do when we advise clients regarding embracing the DevOps culture is all about collaboration, diminishing the friction between the communication conduits between ops and dev, limiting the amount of silos within your organization around networking, storage, compute. The overall infrastructure and application are one unit at the end of the day. The application defines the config, the infrastructure supports that application service. We work on building synergies within that organization to diminish the silos and build basically one cohesive team. Reason for this is we want to rapidly meet market demand. We want to make the company more competitive. We want to allow for them to produce a product faster. We want to allow for them to produce products that with less defects by providing test automation frameworks and strategies that diminish the defects and identify or allow for companies to iterate and develop features faster. When you work with a company and develop a strategy to work the overall organization to be more cohesive, you improve the loyalty within the organization. People respect the others of the infrastructure side of things, and they respect things on the application side because they understand the dependencies of the two have to be delivered in a cohesive way to provide a more reliable, secure product. At the end of the day, when you diminish any type of conduit friction, any type of lack of collaboration, you build a more collaborative team. You also develop a more highly skilled team by allowing for teams to understand what other teams are doing by opening the hood under their day-to-day deliverables, be it the way that they write code and also the way that they deploy the infrastructure. Any questions there that I may have? We want to make sure you can add that at the end of the slide deck today. Next slide, please. What is DevOps? A lot of people come to me and say, Tim, what does DevOps mean to you? DevOps means a lot of things to a lot of different people. The days of developing software in a silo and passing product operations to a desperate team is an educated approach. The days of filing tickets to some far off operations team to deploy or spin up a VM or an EC2 or a Docker container or build up any type of Kubernetes cluster for you to deploy your application on are long gone. Collaborating with your organization to allow for you to build a single, cohesive, unilateral unit of artifacts related to the infrastructure and the application is key to this overall strategy. Taos works on teams to help develop software that not only produces a presumed outcome, but also the way that they manage and deploy and secure that application as well. By what we've done here is we've illustrated basically an infinite loop to just what we want to do here is just articulate that as you deploy code and release code and deploy infrastructure, and release infrastructure, there's an infinite test loop amongst that. You want to be able to understand the objective outcome, understand the business needs, and cohesively align all of your engineering resources to align with that business need. Next slide, please.
Hey, Tim, I did have a question before we go on.
Sure.
What kind of test automation have you seen work well with the DevOps approach?
Sure. So one thing a lot of teams have worked on, or where we've seen people evolve from, is they've taken their existing QA resources and taking some of the test automation that's either built by the QA team or is part of the QA cycle and is actually integrated upstream. One of our advisements is we move a lot of the test of automation, what we call, to the left. So when I check in my code, I will basically do one set of unit testing around my particular feature. That will go into the main branch, which will be approved by somebody like yourself. And then we will collaborate on the integration of all other features of my latest feature. That way we have an iterative cycle to define if my code has actually been validated. That diminishes the amount of defects, improves the velocity of the delivery of the product, but it also gets us, by just, osmosis primarily, around having a better understanding of how I write code, what my code's doing, and you having a better understanding of what that's code doing and how it's going to be deployed as well. You develop a synergy and improve efficiency just by working together in a better way.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Sure. I get a lot of questions like this about tool sets. What is the best tool that's going to help me make my organization improve its efficiency? And one thing that's kind of key to this, it's never about the tools. A lot of clients are looking at the best tool that's out there. I have just went to a conference and I've just determined that I might have to have this thing to improve efficiency. And one thing what we do at Taos is we meet with clients to understand not only your business objectives, but also understand your culture. The DevOps mentality is really simple: more collaboration, understanding your fellow colleagues. What do they do? How do I help them, and how do they help me? How do I bring my application development experience with my infrastructure colleagues so we can develop a cohesive strategy together? You want it, at the end of the day, everybody's got a common goal: the success of the company. We want to be able to ensure that the projected outcomes that are to be built for the company, and understand what those outcomes are, but have that to be a consensus across the entire organization. Before you can go out and define a tool set or understand what the best tool for you, even what cloud you may be using, understanding the process. How do you develop software? What is your mechanism for checking in code? How do you test your code? How do you deploy your Kubernetes cluster? How do you monitor your application? All of these things, there's a process built behind that of how each one of those components are deployed and how they're actually used. Taos collaborates with organizations on a number of ways to help you identify the process and build efficiencies on how to develop those components in a cohesive manner. One of the key concepts behind DevOps is the automation component. We focus primarily on effectively building very mature CI/CD pipelines to allow companies to continually improve, continually deploy on an iterative sense. The more applications that can be deployed in unison basically allows for the company to be more competitive. What I mean by that is having very strategic, mature integration approaches so all dependencies can be identified prior to that application to be deployed.
Hey, Tim, can you maybe give an example of a cultural shift you've seen?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Brandon, for that question. Is that a lot of times where companies each individual application developer does a little bit of feature testing, and then they check their code into the main branch. And then we go into another product in the portfolio, and they may be checking their code, and then that's built in the main branch. Those two products may be part of a larger portfolio product, but the dependencies have never been actually fully tested and verified. So once they go into productions, you produce a bug. Without proper integration testing and an understanding of which each individual team, quote unquote, more collaboration, you allow for the portfolio to be more mature. This also gives a better understanding of how I do my things and what the architecture, what my application is, as well as one of my colleagues' applications. So you build a better product, a better portfolio, a better standard of way doing things when you move in this type of model. The key to this, as we've been talking a lot of things, we've been talking about collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. You want to take siloed teams and bring them together. You know, in legacy organizations, you have an operations team, you have an application team, you have a network team, you may have a storage team, you may have a database team. Each one of those silos have a common goal, and that's to deliver whatever the projected service is to the end user. When you diminish those silos and create a comprehensive collaborative strategy, so bring those teams together into a single vertical, you provide a catalyst for better alignment. So all of the business goals can be met across a diverse team. You also enable teams to have a better understanding of the technologies that are being used, where in a siloed organization, the team that might be doing the Java development does not really understand the schema or the database architecture that they're actually writing against. Once you kind of build a cohesive approach to allow for these teams to have a better communication and collaborate on the application architecture, in this case, the application layer and the database layer, it allows for them to come up with different variance ways to do automated testing, not only against the application layer, but also the database. The team structure allows for the team to be more of a cohesive unit, so each individual product is built in unison. The team structure is not defined by the size of the company. It's not defined by the size of the team. It's devised by what is going to be the suggested outcome, and can we build an expected outcome before we deploy our product and code. The unifying of the siloed teams is pretty essential, because once it diminishes the friction between the communication of each individual teams, but also it allows for you to be, quite honestly, a more efficient and better productive team altogether. The key to this, though, is empowerment, providing an ability for, if you build it, you bought it. Every single team will be accountable for not only the development and deployment of the application, but the support, observance, and delivery of that application as well. So if the alert that may come in around a particular service, the way we try to articulate this with clients is, that alert will go directly to the on-call. Maybe it might be the application architect for that particular team. That might be one of the DevOps engineers that may be on that application team. The support and shared load and delivery of the application are shared across the team, which is why we try to make every single application team or every single pizza team to be accountable for their application or service. A lot of people come to me and say, "Hey Tim, what is DevOps? What does DevOps mean to you?" And what I try to do is I try to tell them it's a cultural thing, right? It's not a tool, it's not a technology, it's a way of doing things, right? I try to focus on trying to guide clients on showing them how to collaborate better with the team, right? A lot of times they'll come to me and they'll say, "You know what, Tim, I need to find a way to get product out the door faster." So one of the key concepts that we come up with is we try to improve your business agility. Taos advises clients is to develop cultures that enable businesses to be updated and move in an agile process. And what this means is to be able to identify things that you need to complete to manage your business more effectively, and in essence, collaborate with your organization better. This allows for you to release updates faster, make applications more reliable, and improve possibly the security profile of your application. When we talk about application modernization, the DevOps culture allows for you to basically work and collaborate with not only the infrastructure, but the application architecture side of things to transform monolithic applications into microservices. Take some of these legacy Java applications and turn them into smaller applications that can be better served within the cloud, or make them more manageable and delivered in a more subsequent, I would say, delivery sense. Instead of one single artifact might be 8. You may be able to split that particular monolithic application into separate functions or features, and each feature becomes its own deliverable version or artifact. When we talk about, agile transformation, when enterprises or organization adopt the DevOps culture, it allows for them to be able to develop a process to develop the entire application infrastructure in a single artifact. I know I've been talking about this immutable strategy a lot of people talk about, but when you start working on looking at the infrastructure and the application as a single unit, does not necessarily have to be delivered as a single unit, but when I make a change in my EKS cluster configuration that may have an impact to Brandon's Java application, we work in concert to mitigate that integration or that invalid or incompatibility, excuse me, but to better coordinate a way to process the test our application. So when I make a change, it understands all the dependencies with his application, and we work on a process instead of automation to test that application and infrastructure in concert. Any questions there? Okay, we'll leave those for the end of the evening. Okay, slide 9, please. Taos works with enterprises and organizations to allow for them to utilize the best practices, not only in process, but technology. We work with teams to help identify where the cultural issues may concern within your organization to help you to accelerate adoption. We look for teams to look on way to better provide some type of unit and integration testing framework to help you build on efficiencies around developing your software. We look for ways for teams to look at the current skill gap you may have, or better yet, augment that skill gap to help you develop a process to build a better product, iterate faster, identify defects quicker, and improve your service reliability. At the end of the day, looking at a way to build a cohesive single vertical to allow for teams to use the best practices in technology and process to deliver a product that is best for your end user. I'd like to pass the rest of this slide deck off to my esteemed colleague, Mr. Brandon Knitter.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate it. I'd like to start by talking about our Taos methodology for introducing DevOps into different environments, starting with the assessment. We like to understand the culture and the processes that are in place today and locate or identify what is or is not working for the organization. We may discover some details that were not previously known either to Taos or to one of our clients. And we want to start building that vision. You'll see as we build it along the way, we want to build that vision towards DevOps automation. Putting together a plan is important that we include both the technical and business outcomes that are desired. On the business side, we look for things such as roadmaps, timelines, and we definitely want to align with any budgets. We learn about the roadmap for the applications and services that are currently deployed, as well as the roadmap for the infrastructure and the platform that those applications are deployed upon. When we look at the design phase of introducing the DevOps methodology, we have a strong focus on enabling automation. As we talked about previously, culture, process, and automation make up a DevOps methodology and a DevOps strategy. We again want to align with each of the teams so that we can look at whether we need to retool or refactor the applications for the DevOps enablement. And also we want to align with the requirements, much like we did with the business. On the technical side, we want to align with the functionality, scale, and availability. From a build phase, we want to look at the reusability of components, as well as consider any configuration management solutions that would allow us to manage the applications and services at scale. Finally, we look at run. How do we want to operationalize or productionalize the application itself? We would look at supportability, whether it's L1, L2, L3 support, maybe introducing runbooks that would allow for the support of the applications in the DevOps environment. And then finally, knowledge transfer. This happens all along the way, but at the very end, we want to make sure we've captured everything we can to make sure that our clients have that understanding and they've learned about their culture, process, and automation along the way. For an enterprise review, as we dive a little bit deeper into the DevOps methodology, want to review the environment in order to determine readiness for the DevOps methodologies. We'll also start touching a little bit on cloud deployments. That's a key component, DevOps is a key component in a cloud deployment, whether it's cloud ready or cloud native applications. And this all starts with looking at the infrastructure platform. The infrastructure platform will consist, will be there to deploy applications onto, and we want to follow best practices as well as we want to identify any repeatability. Some of this repeatability and best practices lead us to solving the compliance and security needs and offering benefits to both. Cloud providers provide a consistent platform so that when you deploy your applications, you're not deploying onto unique or snowflake type of environments. The application architecture is very important to review this as well. It all starts with understanding the application and its architecture itself. This includes any services that are used as part of the application architecture. We look for cloud native applications, those that are already on a consistent platform and could be, that are already on a consistent platform in the cloud, or cloud ready applications. These are applications that might need a little bit of work just to get us there, to get us into the cloud. All of this, again, builds upon the consistency of the infrastructure. So we're starting to layer on top of each one of these. From a code and artifact repository standpoint, we look for a centralized mechanism, both for the development teams as well as for operationally. What are those components that are used for deploying to a production environment? And where does the source code come from? We look for centralized locations for both of these, both the application and compiled artifacts. And what this leads to is higher collaboration, which is a very key part of the culture, as well as higher reusability, which is really a part of process, as well as the automation. Finally, we want to understand the infrastructure as code. We look for a codified infrastructure, typically using tools such as Terraform, although there are others. And we look for a declarative approach to deploying infrastructure. This allows us to define what the infrastructure should look like, and then have the infrastructure deployed to match those needs, as opposed to maybe something more procedural or imperative that would require more logic in order to deploy the infrastructure. The infrastructure as code gives us a couple of different benefits. First of all, versioning. Versioning is really important. When you, just like with any kind of application code, your infrastructure code allows you to release in versions, perhaps even to roll back if you need to, although roll forward strategies are becoming more and more common. It allows you to identify if there is a bug, where was it introduced, and how will you fix it? You can also coordinate the releases with the applications when you use infrastructure as code. This is a really key element here. You don't want to have an application that doesn't have the necessary underlying infrastructure, and you certainly don't want to deploy infrastructure that would not be used by an application or service. All of this allows us to identify those changes programmatically and in a very consistent manner.
Brendan, I got a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
When you meet with a client and you're trying to articulate a strategy, what are the things you look at when you're looking at their infrastructure platform to help to find a solution?
Oh, let's see here. So implementing a strategy for infrastructure, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We look for some of the things I already mentioned, but let's just lay those out a little bit here. You want to look for not a unique environment. You want something that is a platform that will be, I'm sorry, not unique for each application or service. You want a platform that's consistent across the board. So start looking at how are applications currently deployed? Are there any patterns that we can identify? Many times in an organization, you'll find an application or a set of applications that are all deployed in a very similar manner, yet they don't share a platform. That's a perfect opportunity for us to say, hey, look, you got these, let's say 7 applications, they're all deployed in a very similar manner. Let's centralize that so that you can build out a platform that's highly reusable.
Nice. Fantastic. Thank you for that.
Sure thing. Now, the SDLC is probably one of the two components that are going to make up the accelerated adoption of DevOps. We mentioned again, culture, process, and automation. This starts to really push on the automation side, starting with infrastructure automation. Mentioned infrastructure as code previously. Automating the release of that infrastructure at the very beginning of the SDLC pipeline allows us to create that platform. And it also removes the need to provision anything manually, because it is part of, again, this automated release pipeline. We're solving for here from a developer's desktop all the way into a production environment. What does that look like? And it all starts with the infrastructure that application services can be deployed upon. Continuous integration allows us to get really good visibility into any defects or dependencies, or even any functional logic changes that may occur, and they're caught very early. It's right after a developer may submit a piece of code. All those tests are run. Tim touched on this earlier. All those tests are run, and you get immediate feedback to identify if there was a defect introduced or perhaps a performance impact. All that can be captured during continuous integration. And it starts that process of the application and code release. You typically do see a full test of the application and infrastructure at this point, because the two do have to come together again. Continuous delivery takes us to that next step, producing the artifacts that can be centralized in the artifact repository I mentioned earlier, and that exact same artifact can be used in a non-production and a production environment. This creates consistency between the environments and allows you to better understand if there's a defect in one environment, can you reproduce it, fix it in another? Finally, continuous deployment. This is not necessarily the end of the pipeline, but it is where the rubber meets the road. Here, we're talking about releasing those applications and services into a production environment, creating manageable mechanisms for them to be configured after release. We'll look for automated deployments without manual intervention. And it also starts to show us scale. So if you're deploying an application to many different instances or even into a scheduled container environment like Kubernetes, that's hard to deploy manually. So you look for this automated mechanism that then allows you to scale up or scale down as necessary. Application modernization builds upon this once again. At this point, we've solved for enterprise readiness through the usage of infrastructure platforms and code repositories. We've migrated to infrastructure as code. We've built out that SDLC pipeline for continuous integration, delivery, and deployment. And now we look at the application itself. Here, we want to find out how is the software delivered? What is the approach being used? And how does that partner with the application's release? There are a couple of different mechanisms for, or different approaches to deploying applications that are listed here. The application replatforming, refactoring, and then moving to one of the most modern architectures that we see today, which is microservice architecture. Starting with that replatforming, we can see this is really kind of a lift and shift approach. We have to consider the dependencies, though, such as other services, data stores, any network connections that are required. And in some cases, it does lead us to identify that an application cannot be simply replatformed into a cloud environment, but instead would need to be refactored in order to support a cloud environment and use leverage the DevOps means that we mentioned earlier. Refactoring is really about rewriting that application. It may cause for rewrite of components of the application or maybe the whole application service itself. We can leverage many of the DevOps methodologies here, including the software delivery automation for refactoring. There's a couple of different approaches for refactoring. One of my favorite is the strangler approach, where you take a monolithic application and one by one, you slowly pull out the different services so that you do start to decompose that monolith. Talking just a bit about microservice architecture, very typical usage pattern is to leverage Kubernetes as the scheduler for containers and developing these separate services that each work individually. much like that two-pizza team, we want to have those teams be able to own and support their own service and then have contracts with other services so that they could be consumed. And by the way, my favorite pizza is pepperoni. So Tim, I don't know what yours is, but for a two-pizza team, it better be pepperoni or I'm not joining that team.
Well, if I'm on the team, there's none left. So yeah, I do have a question, and we're talking about application refactoring. Can you articulate to me a monolithic application of why or how you would illustrate or articulate back to the client why their monolithic application is not cloud native?
Oh, good question. I love that one. So ignoring cloud for just a moment, if an application has to be released as with all functionality as a single release and runs in a single single runner like a JVM, that's going to be considered a monolithic application. Moving something like that into a cloud environment involves a lot of dependencies, a lot of testing, and it's kind of a one shot, as opposed to taking an application, decomposing it first and moving one at a time. Monoliths typically are not cloud ready because of those dependencies. Take, for example, a large monolithic application that has a large data store. Both of those need to be moved together. And many times you're going to find that your data store, you're going to want to switch the technology to make it more cloud native and your application to perform properly. Does that make sense, Tim?
It does. It does. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
So Taos offers a unique solution called DevOps Now. DevOps Now is great when you're just starting out and while you're mature. It's a solution that's on demand. It has a team that has all the skills you need with a multitude of technologies. It's there for immediate help. So for example, we're available 24/7, 365, and it's a DevOps resource you call up and say, I need help for just a couple of items I don't understand, all the way through to saying, I want help re-architecting my application. I'll talk a little bit more in just a moment about the different areas that Taos performs in, but I can't stress enough that the DevOps Now team will be most successful if they understand your environment first. When we talk about DevOps, the DevOps Now team very much aligned with the DevOps approach that Tim talked about earlier. They understand the culture, they understand the process, and of course the automation and tools is really the technical components that they bring to the table. But they can help introduce to these different teams the migration to a DevOps methodology. I mentioned site reliability engineering here. That's one of those DevOps capabilities that allows you to have that 24/7 support yourself. And finally, just to talk a little bit about Taos, we really want to partner with you. Those are the most exciting projects. Simply offering one or two solutions, that's not enough for us. We want to become your go-to partner. Our DevOps engineers are skilled, they're ready to help, and can be there at a moment's notice. Our DevOps Now approach gives you that follow the sun support as well as the deep skills. Again, that's an on-demand type of offering. And then finally, our professional services team can help both create roadmaps for culture as well as the process and automation that you require. All of these can work together, so you can have the DevOps engineers working with professional services, and when the time is right, you can use DevOps Now to help continue to support your environment. Excellent. So if there are any questions, please add them into the chat and we'll be ready to answer them now.
All right, great webinar, great content, Tim and Brandon. Really appreciate that. Brandon and Tim, I brought you back on. Are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Dave.
Yes, we are.
Excellent. All right. Well, for everyone out there in the audience, I want to call your attention first before we start Q&A to the poll question that we just brought up on the screen. It says, what additional information would you like about the Taos DevOps Now solution? And it's a multi-select question, so feel free to select one or multiple options there on the poll. We do appreciate, of course, your participation in that. I also want to remind you about our best question prize we're running, so keep those good questions coming in. I noticed that Tim and Brandon have been doing a great job answering questions electronically during the event. We do have still a number of questions left to respond to here. So let's start off with the first one. And Tim or Brandon, feel free to jump in on any of these. The question from Ernesto is, during refactoring, would you recommend leveraging cloud-specific features like AWS RDS, or go with something more generic?
Yeah, I can take that one, David.
Go ahead.
I'll let you add your 2 cents at the end, Tim. It really depends, and I hate to give that answer, but if you're going to go all in with the cloud provider, it makes sense to leverage the services that they provide. This does become a little bit more complicated if you want your application to be portable between cloud providers, but there's typically an analog between cloud providers that you could use to solve your needs. If you're going to do an overlay of an application between cloud providers, when we start looking at multi-cloud, which has gone beyond hype, we're now seeing a little bit more of, you may want to look for more generic tooling, as well as more generic services that are offered by the cloud providers. So you do have that, those identical services across the board. I don't have an exact answer right now or exact example. The example that Ernesto brings up is AWS RDS. Absolutely great managed service to leverage. In that case, should you need to go to a non-AWS specific managed service, there is a path for that, as opposed to leveraging an all-in service such as Redshift on AWS or BigQuery on GCP. Tim, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that it all depends on, in some cases, the skill of the team, right? There are some cloud native components that you can actually integrate in that type of strategy. Understanding what it is you want to do at the end of the day and what level of support you want to assume, so to speak, is kind of key to that decision making. But at the end of the day, is what Brandon had mentioned. There isn't a single answer to that question. Depending on the architecture, the skill of the team, the scale of the application, et cetera, kind of all are part and parcel of that conversation.
Got it. Okay, excellent. Let's see. Next question here from Vincenta. Do you have to know a particular programming language to get into DevOps or be a DevOps expert?
That's a good question. So quite honestly, the answer is yes and no. Depending on the framework itself, most DevOps tools or most automation is written or utilizes Python. But if you're familiar with Shell, there's enormous amount of most of the open source tooling, as well as the cloud platforms will work with those two languages. If you're familiar with PowerShell for the Windows platform, or are looking into C#, that those are compatible too. But it all depends on the tool set. What do you want to do? What is the OS platform? What is the endpoint mechanism you're trying to interact with? What is the API? So there isn't a single language. I would say if you are truly looking to be a strong DevOps engineer, be a technologist, focus on things like Shell, Python, and possibly PowerShell, and you'll be very dangerous and helpful all at the same time.
Got it. Great advice.
Sure.
Question here from Adam, who's asking, when you undergo a data transformation, I've seen teams have issues focusing on the problem and instead focusing on getting the tech in place and hope it solves their problem. How does Taos assist with that?
Oh, let me jump in there, Tim, and I think this will probably both need to answer this a little bit, because there's two parts here. First of all, establishing that DevOps culture within the organization is an area where Taos works with different leaders as well as engineers to identify how the teams can work together. We don't want to have that throw over the fence mentality. So it really comes down to the culture aspect where we have to start. Now, going on from that, when we think about process and automation, that does lead us to tool sets that you need to focus on. So where Taos can help is both on establishing the DevOps mindset, as well as having engineers who can come in and handle the technology for you should you want to handle the culture, process automation, that mindset yourself. So we do have both professional services that lead organizations into that DevOps methodology, as well as professional services that offer engineers that can help with getting the tech in place, as you put it, Adam. Okay, anything you want to add, Tim?
Yeah, and I would probably add that when, this is a good point, Adam, is that when you're doing any type of large data transformation, focusing more on the data type, where database engine you're looking for, or whatever appliance you may be moving from, either a Java-based application to a data lake, or are you doing some type of read or any type of aggregation of that transformation. All of those considerations should be concerned. I focus a lot of times on security and identity, who has access to the identification, where is it stored, what's its retention, etc. And then being able to build the technical solution around the problem better. So I think that's a true statement. Understanding your data and what do you want to do with it is kind of key to that conversation.
Yeah, great point. Understanding the data, understanding the applications have got to be key to success, I would think, with this kind of transformation. Another good question that came in here from Sachin. How does DevOps affect architecture? And maybe you want to clarify, are we talking about the software architecture, the hardware architecture? Does it affect them differently?
Sure. If I can take this one, Brandon, if that's okay.
Yeah, please do.
I would suggest that DevOps improves the architecture if you're looking from an embedded architecture component. Let's say you are writing software for a physical platform, network switch, etc. Building test automation and collaborating with the development teams, as well as the ability to deploy and test that particular component for a hardware device, could impact the architecture, because you may come to a place where you have more of a generic base OS that can be tested. When you start talking about the application architecture, let's say, for example, it's cloud ready. It's just a typical Java application. The application of the software component, or the application itself, dictates the rest of the program. So the application architecture does, in some cases, can be changed, but you basically build your infrastructure and your application based on the configuration of that application. That application serves up the features and functionality that basically delivers the services to your end user, generates revenue. So all of your deliverables are basically focused on supporting that application. Now, where that actually gets impacted is that somebody comes along and says, hey, you know what, this monolithic Java app is really kind of difficult for us to move. It's not very mobile. Why don't we start looking at ways to build microservices and breaking up that single artifact into single microservices, kind of what we talked about in the webinar. But the DevOps component does not necessarily impact the architecture directly, but the abstraction of the way that you manage and deploy and support that application could drive the deliverable, or maybe have you refactor, or maybe readdress, or even just take a look at that application architecture. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, great answer. Moving on, a lot of good questions coming in. Thank you, everyone, for those. I want to remind you of the poll there still as well. Don't forget to answer that before you go. Next question that came in, they're asking, can you kind of give us a goal of DevOps? Like, if we were to go to the CIO or the CEO and say, hey, we want DevOps, and he'd say, what's the goal? What would be the answer, you think?
So I think about that in a couple of different categories, and thank you for that question. It's a very broad question, but I think it gets to the point of why DevOps? Like, what are the challenges and benefits? So first and foremost would be business acceleration. If you're looking to introduce new features and functionality for your application or services, you want to think about, how does tech not get in the way? The goal of DevOps is not to introduce new technologies, not to necessarily implement technologies that would otherwise be unnecessary, but instead streamline that process so that an engineer, a software engineer, application engineer, when they develop the product, it's streamlined out into a production environment, high quality, has that functionality or defect resolution that you're looking for. Second area I would say is really technical acceleration. If you're not worried about all the components that come up with an application release, you can focus on those few technologies that enable the application release. So that technology side, once you have the pipeline built, which is DevOps is very pipeline driven, once you have that pipeline built, it should run on its own. There's always care and feeding and maintenance, but it should not get in the way of a developer wanting to release something into a production environment fully tested, fully baked. There's a shared responsibility within an organization, especially on the technical side. Old days, there was a development team and an ops team, and this is merging it together. I think another question I'd asked, what is the responsibility in DevOps? It's a shared responsibility, and quite frankly, that goes all the way down to the application engineer. And does that mean that an application engineer might be on call to support their application? Absolutely. Absolutely. You want that shared responsibility for the success of an application. Tim, would you add anything else there?
Yeah, this is a pretty common question. I would say, just to really summarize is, improved efficiencies provide a better quality of product and shorter time to market is your goal. Just speed the deployment, improve the quality, reliability of the application, and diminish any kind of or improve the efficiencies between your teams.
Great advice. Great advice. Thank you. Let's see. Next question comes from Chris. He's asking if you can recommend any free resources that he could leverage or his team could leverage to get started learning those program languages that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, if you're looking to learn Python, there is a litany of free services. Look at PyPy. There's tons and tons of stuff online to just learning programming, just basic programming languages. Shell, if you want to stick with the really easy ones. Python, shell programming, any type of shell scripting. Those two you can find all over the web. If you have, these are not necessarily free, but I would also look at things like Cloud Guru, Linux Academy. There's a very slow monthly entry point to both of those applications, and there's an enormous amount of information that's available to you. But I can't share too many products around that, but there's a lot of online resources that are available to you free that will just give you your own free IDE, and you can just start hacking away there.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'd add
absolutely.
that there's.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, David. I'm just going to add that when I've done research, when I was learning a lot of these technologies, I found YouTube has just a tremendous number of free resources available. So search around there. I don't have any specific examples, but as Tim indicates, there are other paid solutions. But YouTube's a great resource for free training.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's amazing what you can learn out there on the internet. So many great free resources. I've been to freecodecamp.org as well. A lot of good resources. Next question from Kartik, if I'm pronouncing it right. Can you explain the benefit of continuous integration? Exactly, like what is it? How does it help?
Tim, do you want to take that one? No? Let me take a stab at this, then Tim, I'll have you maybe round it out for me. Continuous integration is about taking code and automatically making sure, or I say in an automated fashion, making sure it's of high quality. So in continuous integration, you might see things such as unit and functional testing. There is compilation. There could be some dependency analysis, continuous integration. There was a question earlier about security. How would you implement security within continuous integration? That's another great example where continuous integration will solve some of those problems and provide some benefits around automation. So no longer does the developer need to compile and deploy from the desktop. That compile and availability of artifacts comes from continuous integration as well as a continuous delivery aspect. Not to be confused with continuous deployment, where you're pushing everything out to a production environment, but continuous integration is the first step of that pipeline.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Interesting. Let's see. Another question here I wanted to ask you, and that is around the DevOps toolchain. Is there like a standard DevOps toolchain that you would recommend, or does it just vary a lot from company to company?
There are some common themes. I really don't want to get into too much of a tools discussion because there's so many out there. But there are some common elements for every DevOps tool chain. You will have the automated, as I mentioned, with continuous integration, the automated compilation tools. You will have artifact repositories, for example. And when you look at continuous delivery, and then from the deployment side, that tends to be a common set of tools, yet implementation is very different depending on the organization, the type of application, the application architecture, and of course the business goals you're looking to meet. David, do you think I answered that question, or did I miss the intent?
I can.
No, I think you did.
If it's okay, I think I can add to that.
Sure.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, so when we talk about DevOps methodologies, I think the key to any type of tooling, and we talked a little bit about this in the presentation, was focus on how are you going to communicate. So, tools like GitHub allow for you to collaborate from a code perspective using pull requests or merge requests to basically merge your code or better view your code between your dev and your ops teams. When you're talking about testing your application, tools like Jenkins, for example, do really great frameworks for doing any type of unit and feature testing or integration testing. You can add load testing to that, but it's not necessarily, I would never say like Jenkins is the go-to, right? You may find that some of the better known tools have more support, more automation and APIs and plugins built for them. But understanding the problem, how to communicate with your colleagues is absolutely key to it. Like Brandon understanding his architecture, and I understand my architecture, and then us sharing our dependencies between the two of us is kind of key to the strategy. I hope that.
Excellent. Yeah, that's great. That's great to help us understand the tool chain idea. Looks like we're running out of time here, about 30 seconds left. Maybe just time for one more quick question before we wrap up. I like this question. They say, hey, we're already using DevOps in our organization in some way. Could Taos still be a fit for us? Could Taos still help us?
Not to turn into a sales pitch, but absolutely. And the reason why I'll say that is because we do focus not just on the culture, process, and automation, but also the very highly skilled engineers within the organization that we didn't dive into. Our engineers do have access to all the latest tools and technologies. We've done these implementations many times. So depending on where you are in your journey and where you have those gaps, Taos does have engineers that can help you end to end or in those little areas.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. And I think to add to that is, as a consulting firm, we do see a myriad of problems and situations in cloud platforms. And a lot of times just having that ability to view different variances, the way people do certain things, we bring that knowledge to, the client. We identify deficiencies in their process, or we might come up with a particular component that may help them improve their velocity or time to market.
Excellent. All right. Chris out there in the audience said, this is a topic we could talk about all day. I think he's absolutely right. I know I could. Tim and Brandon, it's been really great chatting with you on the topic of DevOps. I enjoyed it. I'm sure the audience did as well. Thank you so much for being on the event today.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you to the audience for all the excellent questions. They just keep on coming in, so we appreciate that. We'll have to get back to some of these questions after the event. Before you go, I want to remind you about the poll question there that's on the screen. And of course, don't forget about the Taos DevOps Now link that's there in your audience console, where you can learn more about the Taos DevOps Now solution and how it can help you and your company. And then finally, I want to announce the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card. That's going out to Sarah Maloney from Virginia. Congratulations, Sarah Maloney from Virginia. Thank you to everyone for being on the event today. I learned a lot. I hope that you did too. We'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.